Right, so we might have a couple more folks joining here at the last minute, but we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to day 11, our next to last session of our summer training series. And today we are going to be talking, oh, I didn't change that slide. We're not talking about promoting, sorry. Let me make sure I'm on the right slide here. Oh gosh. Sorry, making you all dizzy. So we are going to be talking about promoting adult youth partnerships, and we're going to be talking a lot about the use of languages. So sorry if I made you all dizzy as I'm not even sharing my screen. You didn't even see what I was sitting here trying. I was going back and forth trying to get the right screen. I was stressing out, but I was making you all dizzy by changing it, and then I realized I hadn't even been sharing it. Good grief. Okay. Now we are in day 11 of promoting youth adult partnerships. So we're gonna jump right in because there is a lot of content this time. So when we're talking about promoting youth adult partnerships, if you remember last week, we were talking about those different ways in which a young person could be treated. So either as an object, as a recipient, as those, services, opportunities, and supports, or the gold standard would be as a partner. Although a lot of the conversation we had is that there are some times when, we kind of can make the argument for being the recipient, or I think it was Nancy who shared a good perspective on, really making sure that when we are talking about partnership, that it's in a really authentic way. Because it's not fair, and it doesn't move things forward at all if we have this artificial perceived partnership that doesn't really make a difference. So a true youth adult partnership would treat young people as equal partners. It would also cultivate and build trust. And again, if we think back to those brain building activities, this is one of those great things that helps a young person to build that self-esteem by having autonomy, by having some control over their lives. It does require the sharing of information. This is one thing I think CASA really shines at, is because CASA volunteers tend to be a trusted figure who talks to children about their cases and talks to them about, because it's the nature of your role, right? If you're working with an older youth or a teen, you have to ask them what their wishes are. You have to say, hey, there's this kind of hearing coming up. What do you think about it? So it already kind of naturally leads to those kinds of information sharing conversations. It does require honesty and transparency in those conversations. So even when if a child asks a question and the answer makes us really uncomfortable to say, getting, kind of finding words to be able to have those conversations. So even, I always tell teenagers that I work with that, my job is to represent their best interest and also to tell the judge what their wishes are. And I say, sometimes what you want and what I think is best for you might not be the same thing. And if that happens, we're going to talk about it and we're going to talk through it. There's never really a reason for CASA, whether it's with a child or with a parent, to surprise anyone. There's no strategy or advantage to us like keeping our recommendation or our thoughts to ourselves on what we think is best for someone. And we really want to be talking through those things. And again, like I said, being really clear about those expectations. So kind of, hey, these are the things that we can have true partnership on, and where we can really have youth-led decisions. And these are things where, we are relying on a judge or relying on the entire team to make decisions. So being really clear with those. So I want to hear from you. Think about, all of you have been doing this, you've done this before. So think about what skills you either already use or that you might use or that someone could use when they're working in partnership with young people. What skills do you think are important? So for CASAs, caseworkers, foster parents, what skills do you come to mind? And feel free to unmute or add them in the chat box, whatever is comfortable for you.
I think being an active listener and really listening to what the person is saying.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, being an active listener, absolutely. Yep. And Kara adds to what Betty said, and she adds transparency in there. Yep. Having those honest, kind of raw conversations sometimes is really critical. Anyone else? Oh, I see more in the chat.
I think being flexible and adaptable is really important.
Yeah, I agree, Frankie. And Rochelle shares in the chat, communication, collaboration, active listening, thinking outside of the box, being honest, adaptable, flexible. Julie says, don't talk down to them and meet them where they're at. Absolutely. Yeah, in the conversation I was having this morning, I said, sometimes we were talking about teenagers attending court. And I said, here in Athens County, we've had to really work at getting everybody, meaning the grownups, comfortable with having young people in court hearings, because that gets messy sometimes, right? Sometimes it doesn't go smoothly. Sometimes, we have to explain things differently. And sometimes the biggest issue is the discomfort of the grownups, right? We have to kind of work through that. But knowing that it can be messy, and I think it was Frankie talking about just being flexible and being adaptable. Sometimes things can take a turn that we weren't expecting when we're having these types of really deep conversations with people. Great.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, please do.
I think you do have to be assertive, especially when you're in some of those professional crises meetings with a bunch of team members, and your opinion is different than everyone else's.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a good one. Thank you for sharing that insight. Yeah, you definitely do have to be assertive. And sometimes that means interrupting on behalf of the young person to create space for their opinions and space for their perspective. So sometimes that's a useful thing that you can do to say, hang on a second, we're hearing from everybody else. I want to give, Billy time to share right now, or Billy time to contribute. Great. So this is one, speaking of, things getting messy and complicated, and we have to sort through these kind of relationships. Now, we've used the word partnership a lot, but one thing that we have to acknowledge and have to understand is this power dynamic between us and between the young people that we serve and support. So thinking about your role as a CASA volunteer, or if you work with youth in other ways, I know we have teachers and social workers on the line. So what authority do you have in your role? Like, what do you have authority over? And feel free to unmute or use the chat, whatever you'd like.
Well, I think we have authority over presenting information to them and representing that back to the courts. So we have ownership on how we can do that professionally with them or empathetically with them. We have authority over our own behavior when we're talking to kids, and I think we can provide some kind of role models even when we're dealing with them to help exemplify maybe how to do things when you're communicating to get your point across.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we have control of kind of what we bring to the table, right? As the adult, as the professional in that situation. Nancy shares that she has some control over the information the judge receives about the case. Absolutely. She also shared kind of a sense of humor can help break the ice, but cautions that it could be misinterpreted. So using that with caution. Yeah, we have control over what we say about a child or how we say it. We have control over those things. One point of tension in a lot of our cases right now is the way in which young people are being described when a placement is disrupting. So a lot of times we'll see that kind of narrative of that child that gets shared with other foster parent networks or residential facilities. And it's very much written through the lens of caregiver burnout and caregiver fatigue, and less through the lens of what that child actually needs. And so that's, again, right, we're asking for placement, we're asking for those things, but we have that power to influence an outcome simply by the words that we choose to use when we're describing a young person to, the other providers. So even just the way we talk about the situation with the judge or with other providers, there is some power in that. Rochelle shares, we represent the best interests of children on behalf of the minor child. So there's, again, some natural power imbalance there already, right? You report directly to the court. You're going in and you have the ear of the judge in your work. We have control over how we react to those obstacles in the case. Absolutely. Kara shares, we have control over when we visit and interact with the child. Absolutely. Especially children who are in more restrictive settings, right? There's a lot, they can't just call you up and say, hey, I would like for you to visit me tomorrow. I have some things I want to talk to you about. They might not even have enough control to be able to decide when they want to make a phone call. So really a lot of that power and control rests with you. Absolutely. So what might it look like? And what are those opportunities where you could share your power with young people? And to get you thinking, I shared one a little bit ago. Sometimes as CASA, we need to be the person who interrupts the conversation to make space for what the young person's perspective is and what they have to share. So the question is, what might it look like, or what might be some instances where we might be able to share our power with young people, or share that kind of that authoritative power with young people? And the example I share is, that conscious interrupting. Where we obviously politely, I'm not meaning rudeness, but interrupting to make space and save space for, and even maybe give some of your space to that young person's perspective. Nancy shares, including the young person's input in the court report. Absolutely. Yeah, in a lot of instances, I'll even go over my report if I'm able to have it in writing, or I'll just kind of talk to them about what I'm going to recommend in my report and ask if they have any questions. And sometimes I ask kids and teens too, am I missing something? This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm going to tell the judge. What am I missing here? Tanya shares, advocating for in-camera interviews. Absolutely. Bringing their input to the table and inviting them to meetings or court, give them chances to choose visits and talks. Absolutely. Yeah. Rochelle, her last point is give them the chance to kind of choose when the visits or when you're talking to them, seeking their input on that. Obviously, everyone has different degrees of flexibility and availability, but asking them of, hey, I've been coming to visit you and it happens to fall after your visit with your parents. Is that the best time for me to come, or should I try and work out a different day? And asking for that young person's input. Absolutely. Great. So when you think about, all of these ideas and all of these perspectives we've been sharing, what makes you nervous about it, or what kind of excites you about it? What are your reactions to, inviting and pulling in? And I know a lot of you are already doing this work, so you've had to work through some of these things or have faced resistance along the way. So I'm interested in just how you're feeling, or what reactions you've seen out of this.
I like it because it opens a door for ideas that maybe I wouldn't have thought of on my own, like ways to help the young person. And it also makes me feel a little nervous, because expecting the unexpected is sometimes hard to do, especially when you're catering to such a delicate situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, for me, I always worry, I don't want to cause harm, right? I don't want to add to any kind of harm. So it's creating that balance and really trying to tease through and unpack what is, my hesitation based on not wanting to cause harm, and what is my hesitation based on my own discomfort or my own nervousness. And that's kind of hard to sort out because that looks messy sometimes.
Yeah, and sometimes it is kind of difficult to distinguish, like what you were saying, maybe a child's wishes aren't necessarily what you believe to be in the best interest for them. But then also sometimes I don't know, you don't know what the outcome will be. And I would hate to make the wrong decision.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and Rochelle shares too, not really liking to be confrontational. So it's hard to kind of do that interruption or that kind of, oh, hey, hang on a second, we've left someone out here. And so she mentions, managing relationships for a good outcome, and especially if she has a different opinion than child protection. Yeah, all those things can get a little sticky on a lot of levels. So now let's think about if we were wanting to see youth-adult partnerships become more of the norm in our work and looking out for those opportunities to do this, what conditions need to exist for a youth-adult partnerships to flourish? And I think of, Nancy made some great points last week about, it kind of has to be authentic and genuine. But what are some other conditions that need to exist?
Establish trust by being consistent.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Frankie. Yeah, establishing trust, being consistent, absolutely. I know I always kind of strive to be a boring person, if you will, in a child's life or in a young person's life. And I mean boring in that, like, dependable and, kind of consistent, and, they kind of know what to expect from me. So, I always kind of joke that I want to be like a boring person in their life. Pat shares being respectful. Yep. Tanya says, being clear about boundaries. Although the child is at the center of every case, not all case information is necessarily appropriate for them to have. Yep, absolutely. Yep, autonomy, having adults wanting to be present to know what is said, and really wanting the child to feel free to speak freely. Yeah, that's an interesting one. There's a lot of curiosity when a child, particularly if it's rather contentious and maybe a lot of the parties are at odds, everyone wants to know what it is the child told the CASA and all of that, or wanting to know those things. Yep, Deb shares a good lesson, build trust by being honest with them. One dishonest statement can undo the trust, absolutely. Great. Okay. So as we talk about this, and I think we all know, getting to this place and kind of striving is definitely the goal, right? But we have to be realistic. We have to establish those boundaries, and obviously cloaking all of this in safety and our understanding of that child's particular trauma experiences. But even outside of that, sometimes this partnership model when working with teens can be affected by attitudes, either on a personal level or on a bigger systems type level, or just even our own even stereotypes, right? How many people kind of say, oh gosh, teens, I don't want to work with teens. Just those kind of just things that are just ingrained in us. So what are some, but let's think about these all together here. So what are some stereotypes that young people hold about adults in the child welfare system? So we're talking from the perspective of the teen. What are some stereotypes that you think a teen might have about adults, like about all of you? Yep. Oh, they don't understand. They don't care about me. Yep. Yep. You're out of touch. Don't understand. Some of you maybe even heard these things.
They think you're in it for a paycheck, and they're quite surprised to realize, nah, I don't get paid.
Yep. Yep, Nancy says labeling adults in a black and white way, like good cop, bad cop. Yep. Tanya says, oh, they don't care. They don't really want to help. I assume yes is to Frankie's comment about, oh yeah, you're just here for the paycheck. Absolutely. I know when I worked in children's services, there was like a rumor floating among some of the families that had open cases with children's services that caseworker, so there was like 2 caseworkers and a supervisor who all kind of around the same time got new vehicles just by coincidence. And so there was this kind of rumor starting to go around that when children were removed, that somehow there were bonuses, right? So it's just, however those kind of, angry talk escalates into those rumors. Yeah, that there's a quota. The more kids you take, the more money you get. Absolutely. Yep, Julie, like we have this agenda that we want them to conform to. Absolutely. Yeah, and then just even down to, hearing, just a couple weeks ago, I think I mentioned this, but I heard a young person when I said, oh, my job is to tell the judge what you want. So help me understand that so we can go into court and make sure I get that across. And this young person said, well, what does that even matter? It doesn't matter what I say, like all of you will still just make the decisions that you want. So, that kind of feeling just generally disenfranchised or marginalized. Absolutely. Yeah, Tanya's heard, you'll be gone soon, right? That's often a symptom of that turnover of kind of, oh yeah, how long are you gonna last kind of thing. Absolutely. So what do you think, if you unpack all of those statements, like, right, all of those, those are kind of little barriers that are being thrown up by a young person when we think about those stereotypes. What do you think might be behind some of those biases or some of those stereotypes? What do you think might be motivating some of that? Yeah, Rochelle says fear of abandonment. Like, I'm gonna push you away before you drop me. Yeah, fear and mistrust, absolutely. Absolutely. Past experiences, yeah, it just is maybe been reinforced by the way that they've experienced the system and interacted with the system. They don't have many healthy relationships yet. Yeah, a lot of this is that, how you hear that it just takes one consistent, stable adult. You've all heard that's where this research comes, that's where that research comes from, are these lack of healthy, stable relationships. Good. Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is that fear of the unknown, because we tend to conceal or shield young people from information in our cases. So, it might mean that the case, changes hands from a caseworker, or something happens in the court case, and we're not communicating that clearly to the young person so that they understand. And so they're drawing assumptions about what happened. I know I've talked with young people who have transitioned from caseworker to caseworker, and they have assumed that the previous caseworker was fired for not telling them something. And really it's just, no, that's actually how the process works. It moves from this unit to this unit. That just wasn't being communicated clearly to that young person. So sometimes conclusions can be drawn based on that lack of information. Great. All right, so let's start talking a little bit about language. We've already been touching on this a little. So being intentional with the words that we choose to use can signify shared power. And again, we do need that authenticity piece. So focusing on, using terms like we and us rather than I or you. Kind of saying things like, what are our goals, for the next couple of weeks? Referring to youth with kind of a strength-based and developmentally appropriate terms to help reduce that hierarchy and that kind of authoritative language that can sometimes be embedded within our society and within our symptoms. And this is one I struggle with because my brain likes to leapfrog ahead of steps. Those of you that have ever worked on a project with me know this is true about me. But jumping directly to offering solutions, because I'm a problem solver. So that is my natural tendency to want to jump right to those things. And sometimes walking alongside someone as we figure it out One is a better learning opportunity for them, but two, I say it all the time, I don't know what I don't know. And so, that young person might have had a skill or an interest that I didn't know about, and I could have missed out on it if I jump ahead. So that's that's always on my personal development list in every aspect of my life. As Tanya, I think, shared a couple slides ago, but being really clear with boundaries and non-negotiables while also looking for those opportunities for autonomy. So, let's not pretend, if the youth doesn't have a choice in one aspect of the case, let's not pretend that they do. Let's just say, this is what's happening here. Here are all the things that we do have control over. And being really honest with that, because to Deb's point, to kind of make it seem like there's some youth choice in something, and then they learn later on that it was all just kind of a smoke screen, that could actually do a lot of damage to your relationship with them. So, but being really intentional with the language that we use. So I'm going to give you some examples of terms that we often hear, and let's get honest here, they're terms that I have found myself using, and I try not to, but I still do. And we're just going to talk through, and you can add in the chat box things that are better alternatives to these. And then I actually have a handout that has even more of them on it. So kids or kiddos, I say kiddos a lot, and I try really, really hard not to say it when I'm talking about teenagers. So what's an alternative to kids or kiddos? And think back to when you were 17. If someone called you a kiddo that, maybe wasn't your great grandmother.
Young adult.
Yep, young adult, young person, youth, young man, young lady. Yep. Great. Yep, just teenager. I also have realized that I tend to call people buddy a lot, and I'm trying to stop doing that. I'm like, all right, see you next time, buddy. Like, please stop doing that. It just comes out of my mouth and I'm horrified every time I do it. But yep, perfect. Okay, how about this one? So those, oh, I think you should, you need to, you should. What are some alternatives here?
I wonder if, what
Yep.
do you think?
Yep, I wonder if, what would it look like if, what have you tried? Yep. How do you feel about it? Even, what do you think we should do? Ask, I use that one a lot when I'm talking with teams. Or maybe even getting down to action planning, right? Of what's the first thing that needs to happen to move forward from your perspective? Kind of asking them that question is good. Great. All right, how about this one? Have you tried, what if you? So if the young person comes and says, I'm struggling with my schedule at school, and in my brain, I want to launch into, have you talked to the guidance counselor yet? Have you talked to your teacher? Have you talked to them about this? Have you done this? Anyone have any ideas about what I could do differently? What do you need from me? Tanya shared a little bit earlier, but what have you tried already? What have you already done? Yeah, Nancy says, trying not to jump into problem solving, asking them why it's happening instead. Absolutely. Hey, what's your plan? How can we work this out together? How can I help you? Absolutely. Perfect. Here's one that's easy to say. The youth I deal with, or the families I deal with, or the cases I deal with. What's an alternative here? Yep, the youth I'm working with, absolutely. The youth I support, the families I work with. Perfect.
Could I interrupt just for a second? I find myself when I'm having conversations, particularly to CASA, I struggle with like how to, because we don't say the person's name, of course, and they're not my CASA. So when you all are referring to the young person that you're working with, is that what you say, the young person that I'm working with, or do you use another term?
That's what I say, but does anyone else have any other suggestions or how they would refer to a young person?
In Lucas County, they have a format that you have to use, and I haven't done one of those reports in a while. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, and Rochelle says, oh, my CASA youth. Yep. Perfect. Yep. Yeah, because Kara, you were talking about like when you're talking just in general about, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, good questions. All right, one more of these. So I don't think that's a good idea, or, you know, the kind of things, I think sometimes it's a little bit of an easy way out when the adults say, oh, well, there's no way the judge is going to let that happen. We just need to move on and focus on other things right now. Any alternatives to these types of statements?
I have some concerns.
Yep. Yep, I have some concerns. What other possibilities? ... Absolutely. Yep, let's think about the ramifications of that. Let's think about options. I have this, again, goes with humor, so it wouldn't work with all youth, but I have a teenager that I'm working with whenever they're, and it's more just if they have, you know, they're talking about running, you know, leaving their placement without permission or something. And I have a very like humorous relationship with them. So I kind of say, would you like a second opinion on that idea? But that might not work with all youth, that, you know, you have to have that humor established. Yep, Kara and Tanya just both share kind of, what do you think the outcome would be? How do you think that would work out? You know, what could go wrong? What could go right with this idea that you're having? Yep, let's brainstorm some options. Absolutely. You know, and even having conversations that very transparently about, hey, this situation is going on right now. What are some things that are out of our control about this? And what are some things that are in our control about this? And then talk through those things. And then, you know, when the things come up about the judge, and in a lot of the cases that I'm working in, I hear, oh, well, so-and-so told me that that's up to the judge, or that's going to get decided. You know, and it's almost like we're placing responsibility on the judge that really the decisions actually happen at a different level than the judge, but it's just kind of easier to say, oh, that's up to the judge. So just being really backing it up and being really honest about that of, you know, I don't know if this could happen. Let's think about this. Let's think about the possibilities, you know, those types of things. And then even saying, if this doesn't work out, or if the judge does say no, do we have a plan B? What else are we thinking here? Kind of thing. Great. Great. Okay, so I am going to drop any other thoughts on language or anything like this as you're chewing on all this. And if you are sitting here as we went through these and you're like, oh gosh, I say that all the time. Again, I say kiddos all the time. I jump to problem solving all the time. Like, right, we're all working on it. And just trying to be, you know, more mindful of it. So we gotta, and like I said, I say buddy and I'm horrified every time I say it. Like, no, come back into my mouth, those words. So I'm gonna drop in the chat box. I'm also flashing it up on the screen for you. But we actually have this little kind of self-assessment tool. And I'm going to give you all a little bit of time just to go through it. Probably not to go through all of it, but I'll give you like 5 minutes to go through. And it's not a test, and you're rating yourself on a scale from 1 to 5. So 1 means you're kind of a beginner. This is a new concept, but you're, you know, going to check it out. So in the first column, you're going to rate kind of where you are. And if you're putting a 5, it's kind of, oh yeah, I got this. Like I really am here on this. And then you're going to set a little bit of a goal for yourself. So where would you like to be? So I've dropped it in the chat if you want to download it. It's also on Google Classroom, but take a few minutes and just kind of rate yourself. using that 1 to 5 scale. And I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. Okay, so I'll let you finish up if you're working on one last one. It's always hard to tell on Zoom. If we were in person, I'd see when everyone starts putting their pens down or something. So now thinking, hopefully you got through, a good bit of it, but of the ones that you've gotten completed, can you identify, just circle 2 of them? So 2 of them that maybe you identified that you want to work on, but 2 of them that you would be willing to work on very intentionally within the next 3 weeks, let's say. So 2 of them that you think you could kind of really really be intentional about. And so go ahead and circle those two. And then I'll just go around and I'll just kind of start at the top of my screen. And if you want to share one of the ones that you're going to work on and any ideas, or one of the ones you're going to be intentional about. So Julie, you're at the top of my screen. Do you care to go first?
I circled to become more familiar, even though we're doing this learning about the trauma. I still feel like there's more that I could learn. So I'm actually reading some books on it so that I can become more familiar with the subject. And then the other one is the resist the urge to take over, because like you, I'm a problem solver. So I want to make sure that I am actively listening and making sure that they're in charge of the conversation and they're leading me in the path that they want to go, I'm meeting them where they're at.
Great, thanks for sharing, Julie. Next on my screen is Betty. Do you want to share?
The first one, and I have to count them. I'm not at home, so I'm looking at this going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Providing opportunities to have youth reflect and learn. I think that I can always improve on that. And, you know, I really do not work that much very often with teenagers, but I'm thinking of the little guy I'm working with, and maybe I shouldn't even say little guy. My CASA youth who I'm working with right now, and, you know, being able to provide more opportunities for him.
Great.
So that's something that came to my mind first thing.
Thanks, Betty.
Mm-hmm.
Next on my screen is Tanya.
I put trust youth to be powerful contributors. A lot of times what I find is they're wishy-washy. And so while they're building trust with me, it's hard for me to trust that they really are not acting on impulse or emotion during that visit, you know, whatever's going on around them, how they're being influenced. So I have a tendency to just say, okay, I hear you, but then really be not trusting of what they're telling me, because my experience has been with the teens, it changes. They back and forth, they flip flop. So that's frustrating for me.
Great, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Next on my screen is Kara.
Yeah, something that I'm really trying to work on is being careful about interrupting people of all ages. I was horrified when a friend just brought this to my attention, that this was a couple of years ago, actually. And then once I started paying attention, I realized how often I do interrupt others, and it's never, it was the reason why I think I was so horrified is because it didn't come out of a place of like disrespect or that I didn't care. It more so comes from a place that I'm like really eager to share, or I have this thought and I want to get it out there. But when I try to be a lot more conscious of it, then I've been realizing how much more you can learn, and how much richer your conversations are, or the different directions that they can go.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing, Kara. Nancy is next on my screen.
Let's see, I'm gravitating towards ones that are relevant to a 15-year-old young man I'm working with now. So I am interested in believing in the potential and empowerment of youth. This young man is really smart and he's not living up to that potential, and it's been a real struggle. Also, I need to improve my ability to identify the positive possibilities in difficult situations. this child's been accused of lying and there's a bunch of evidence from the staff and it's he said, she said, and it's just a really difficult situation right now. So those two skills would help a lot.
Thanks for sharing, Nancy, and we appreciate all of your efforts with that particular young man. Next up, I have Deb on my screen. Deb, fresh out of court. Deb, I wasn't sure if you'd be on today.
Yeah, it was pretty close. The one about resisting the urge to take over, that's just an automatic, natural thing. So it's really hard for me to not do that. I need to work on that for sure. The other one was the listen carefully to people of all ages. I've always been ADD and my brain is always ahead of whatever I'm saying or listening to. And the next thing I know, they're telling me something, but I'm already thinking about what I'm going to respond. So then I miss what they told me. So I need to work on that one.
Yep. Thanks for sharing, Deb. Next, I have Omni.
Okay, I think mine is going to be kind of like Kara's, is the interrupting people of all ages. I think it's an old age thing. Like I'm getting less and less patient, and so something pops into my head, and especially with kids, if they're kind of hem-hawing, I might interrupt them, or even peers. So that is something I really have just recently started trying to focus on. So I am going to make more of an effort to do that, just because I think it's a patience thing, and I think it would be good in all areas of my life, especially, with kids, with adults, all of it. So.
Great, thanks for sharing. Yeah, and I realize you all are talking about interrupting right now, and it makes me think I used the term interrupting earlier, and so to clarify, I meant interrupting the process, not necessarily interrupting a person, but interrupting the standard process and the standard way we do things to make sure that we are giving space and saving space for young people. Okay. Next on my screen is Pat.
Okay, well, I had two, and I keep going back to a young lady that I worked with who was aging out. Although one of them is just my modus operandi, is also resist the urge to take over. I guess I'm one of those people, it's uncomfortable with the status quo when things aren't going well. And this particular situation was pretty fraught with many difficulties. But even in my personal life, I mean, I tend to be a doer, and my significant other is very logical and methodical and procrastinates a lot. And while he's doing that, I just do it. And it doesn't always turn out the best possible way, but at least it was done. So I'm working on that. And the other one, specifically relating to working with this young lady, was identify positive possibilities in difficult situations, because there were just so many overwhelming negatives that had been in her life for so long, and things that had happened, that it was very challenging to find something that you could help them understand might be positive. So I find that in really difficult times, sometimes it's tough to find those, the ray of sunshine. So those would be the two that I thought of.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Pat. It's interesting how many of us are getting real here with our urge to kind of want to take over and like caretake. It might say something about the way we recruit CASA volunteers. Maybe we seek kind of those like caring, motivated people. And so you have this natural tendency to like jump in and take care of people and take care of things. So it might say something. We might actually be profiling in our recruitment model to a certain degree. Next up is Frankie.
I have listened carefully to people of all ages. I find at this stage of my life, I do a lot of writing. I try not to write when I'm speaking with my CASA kids or the foster parents or whoever. I wait until I get into the car to put things down. But because I rely so much on written things, I want them to hurry up and say what they have to say, so I won't forget what I have in my mind. And so like someone else said, sometimes I'll miss what they were saying. I'm so anxious about what it is that I want them to know, so I'm very conscious about that. And let's see, where'd it go? Oh, it's right above. Ability to identify positive possibilities in difficult situations. The young lady I'm working with now, actually, she's not a teen. She's probably she's a preteen. Very difficult circumstances, and who's also dealing with mental health issues. And I work every time I'm with her to find something positive, because she focuses so much on the negative, and the people around her seem to do that as well. And sometimes it's a struggle, but I've managed so far. And sometimes, it's interesting to see that she's taken aback by that I did find something positive. But I'm working on it.
Great, thanks for sharing, Frankie. And last but certainly not least is Rochelle.
So I definitely think you're profiling us here, because I got a couple of the same ones. One is probably like resisting the urge to take over. I definitely do that, and then end up getting, this secondhand emotional trauma after I put in so many hours and worry so much about stuff and try to accomplish it all. But the big one, kind of like Kara was saying, it wasn't out of malice or anything, but I've been trying to be more careful about interrupting people of all ages. And I think that stems from the teaching profession, and I'm used to all this popcorn chatter in the background. So I'm used to kind of talking over that sometimes when I'm teaching, and I need to do better with that.
Great, thanks for sharing. Yeah, and thank you everyone for sharing and just hearing all of your perspective on your frame of mind and how you might do this and how you might actually put it into action. I hope everyone kind of learned from from everyone else as they were talking. I wanted to share two, as we wrap up here, kind of two kind of techniques or tricks that I use when I'm working with young people. And it kind of goes along the lines of what Frankie was sharing, of like, you really want to kind of be taking good notes or things like that. When I'm working with teens, a lot of time, especially if I've been working with them for a while, and they kind of know how things go. They know they can ask me questions and I'll try to answer them, or I'll find out the answers or that kind of thing. And so usually the teens I work with kind of know the routine with me when we're meeting. We'll kind of go through, have, all the conversation we're going to have, whatever it is we're discussing that day. And then at the end, I will like pull out my notebook and I say, all right, what do you want on my list? And they know, or I'll say like, what homework do you have for me? And they know that means like questions that they, we want to make sure, I'll kind of revisit the conversation that we had and say, okay, you were asking earlier about whether or not you're allowed to have a job. I'm going to add that to my list so that I can find out and get back to you. Or you were asking about visits. I'm going to get back to you on that. And things I'm going to follow up on for them. And so it's kind of a way to almost make the note taking become like part of the act, if you will. And it, again, I think a group of teens that I'm working with right now, I think they really enjoy like giving me like my marching orders or giving me my like list of things that they want me to follow up on. The trick is to make sure that you actually follow up on all of those things though. So I kind of do that. Another technique, I don't use it as much with teens, although I have, is anyone familiar with the COW? COW means crisis of the week. And so it's like, oh, I'm having a COW, I'm having a crisis of the week. And so someone was mentioning that they visit with a teenager and it kind of always becomes pretty negative. And so, depending on your relationship with that client, having that conversation about, kind of what is the crisis of the week, or what's the thing we're having the COW about this week, and then problem solve off of it. So I used to, one particular family that I was working with years ago, I met with them on a weekly basis. And that was part of what we did, is I'd say, okay, what's the COW? And we'd kind of talk about the thing that was really on everyone's mind, and we'd problem solve around it. And then we'd move on to kind of our action steps and goals, or whatever it was we were working on. So you can also keep COW in your mind, even if you if you don't ever actually talk to a young person about it, but kind of keeping that mindset when you're working with young people, and it is kind of constant, oh, this happened, and oh, this happened, and oh, this happened. Just really thinking about, in the grand scheme of things, what are these, what are the priorities here? What are the points that need our attention right now? Yeah, and actually, I don't know if that's where the expression came from or not, but, and I don't remember how I came across it. But I'm sure probably some casework, I did it when I was I used that term when I was a caseworker, so I'm sure it's from some casework training I went to. But yeah, now I always joke, I'm like, don't have a CAL, don't have a crisis on the wing. Great. Well, next week will be our final session. So next week we'll be building on this and doing some action planning and talking about next steps. If you want to continue your learning, I'll have a great group of books and videos and movies to suggest if you want to check any of those out. If you've come across a book or a film or a video that has been really useful or correlates with our conversation, please be ready to share that next week, because we'd love to kind of add to our collective resources here and share those. But we'll be focusing on action planning, and then we'll wrap up our time together. But otherwise, everyone have a very happy rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.